the Museum Society of Bombay and Cymroza Art Gallery, I extend a very warm welcome to our three speakers this evening. Radhika, Iyengar, thank you for being with us. And please do join me up front. Katragadda, the artist of this show. Please, Hari, come forward. And Ranjit Hoskote, the curator of the show, and who is going to be in conversation with Hari, Radhika. A few words about Radhika. Her book, Fire on the Ganges, is available here, so some of Ranjit's copies of his books here. If you haven't seen them, please see them on your way out. And Hari's book, that's right. Yes, Hari's book too. So Radhika is the author of a debut non-fiction book, Fire on the Ganges, Life Among the Dead in Benares, published by HarperCollins, India. She's a graduate of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism in New York. Radhika has won the Red Ink Award for Excellence in Indian Journalism and has been the recipient of the Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship and the Sanskriti Prabhadat Fellowship, both extremely prestigious awards, scholarship awards. She's also received the Bianca Pancourt Patton Fellowship, which enabled her to become a writer in residence at Sangam House. Welcome, Radhika, to this evening. Hari, whose work is all around you here, including 2 installation pieces. We'll have a look at them as well at the end of the evening. Hari works across photography, cyanotype, which you see around you, bookmaking, and mixed media genres. He draws his subjects from community life and ecological cycles. Graduating with a master's degree in photojournalism from the University of Texas, Austin, he began his career as a photojournalist in Delhi. With Shweta Upadhyaya, he is the co-author of the book, I'll Be Looking at the Moon, But I'll Be Seeing You, shortlisted for the Aperture First Photo Book Award. He has been honored with the Invisible Photographer Asia Art Award and the Alkazi Photo Book Grant. Welcome, Hari. And the curator, last but never the least, a very important component in the life of this city, Ranjit Hoskote. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for curating this difficult show. Very thought-provoking. I'm not going to say anything more because you're having a discussion on this topic. As you all know, he's a poet, cultural theorist, translator, and a curator. His collections of poetry include Central Time, Jonah Whale, Punch Prose, and Iceland. He is the author of the acclaimed translation of a 14th century Kashmiri woman mystic's work, Lala, the poems of Lal Deep. He has been honored with the Sahitya Academy Golden Jubilee Award, the Sahitya Academy Translation Prize, the S.H. Raza Award for Literature, and the 7th JLF, Jaipur Literary Festival, Mahakavi Kanayalal Sethia Poetry Award. In 2011, we in India were really delighted because he curated India's first ever national pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And I hope India is represented in the coming years with a pavilion. I think we all want that to continue now that it has started after a long lapse. I don't know how many years. So with these few words, thank you very much. This program is being recorded and it will be up on YouTube in about 7 to 10 days. So you can watch it again with leisure and the leisure of your own home. And with these few words, welcome to 3 of you, and looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Cymroza, thank you so much for your words of welcome and for always being open to experiments in the making of art and the curating of art. And Cymroza, as we all know, has this long heritage of being at the forefront of such experimentation from the early 1970s onwards. And on this occasion, I'm really very happy and very moved to be in this conversation with Hari and with Radhika. And in terms of framing remarks, I'm just going to say a few things about what brings us together under the sign of the river, but specifically also the river in crisis. And I'm going to invite both of them to speak of their journeys. I'm just going to say a few things about my journey, but because sometimes you wonder, curatorial practice emerges from curiosity about practices, about other people's practices. So what was it that drew me to this work? I've known Hari's work for a number of years. I've looked at other bodies of work, known of this. But when we sat down together, when I did a studio visit, it was very, very clear to me that this is what we needed to present and to talk about. Because rivers have fascinated me for a very, very long time. The symbolic and ritual aspects of the river in a sacred geography, but also riverine ecologies and what they've meant to us historically and how they've been distorted and effectively destroyed by, among other things, misaligned infrastructure projects, a complete lack of attention to the life of the river. Equally linked to that is something that's interested me in another part of my life, which is the communities that depend on the river, whose livelihood, whose habitation, whose place in society, the grave asymmetries that they face are all linked to it. Or there are scarcities in the riverine ecology which then force some forms of migration or deprivation. So it's the three levels of interest which I think also bring us all together. And some of that for me has emerged through, in a previous life, when I worked with the Hindu on a publication of ideas called The Folio, which is devoted to the river. I just had occasion to go back to it from 2001. Also it's fed into my poetry, which increasingly has appeared under the sign of eco-poetics. And also in an ongoing series of curatorial experiments with Ravi Agarwal, artist and activist, in the course of which I've really learned a great deal from amazing anthropologists who are working on the river, the mountain, the scrubland, thinking here particularly of Amitanshu Acharya, Rahul Ranjan, and Brigupati Singh. So it's from those conversations that I come to this, and that was my point of affinity with this work. And then, amazingly, Radhika's work, which also both of them come to their projects from nearly a decade, respectively, of research and very, very close attention to what they're looking at. So my first question to both of you is really going to be about your journey to the Ganga, to Varanasi. What was it that fascinated you, that activated the imagination, curiosity? So I'm going to start with you, Radhika, and then I'm going to come back to...
Thanks, Ranjit, so much, and thank you for having me here. So to start with, in response to your question, my work began as a student project. While I was doing my master's at Columbia University, we were expected to come up with a thesis idea, a subject to work on for a thesis. And I had a couple of ideas in mind, but I happened to read an article on the Dome community, and that really stirred a degree of curiosity in me. And I went back and I tried to learn more about the community, because I did not know that there was this particular community, which is a marginalized community, a Dalit subcaste community, that specializes in crematory work. And so that really set me off on a process of research and trying to learn more about the community. And whatever academic literature I found was only anchored to their identity at the cremation ground. And there was nothing else, no other alternative narratives surrounding their stories, their experiences, And I was very curious to know about the men in the community, the corpse burners, how they feel when they're working, handling dead bodies. Doing this every day, how does this impact them psychologically? I wanted to know about the children, none of us want to grow up to be corpse burners. So how does this impact them? Whether they have access to education, whether the schools are actually helping them become capable individuals. How is internet influencing them? And then of course the women. Why are they not present in public spaces? Do they have reproductive freedom? Can they step out of their homes, make a living on their own? So these were the questions that really preoccupied my mind, and that's how the thesis came about. And the book was never a part of, eventually it evolved into a book over a period of 8 years. But just to give you an idea of how it began. Yes.
Harry, I'm turning to you now, because it's a natural turn in a way, because the domes and also the tannery workers and the glue workers in Kanpur are central to your work here. And I'd like to draw you out, and we have of course talked about this often, but could you talk about what brought you to the Ganga, to Varanasi, and to a recognition of the catastrophe that's unfolding across this river?
As a photographer, Varanasi is like one of the romantic destinations for everybody who comes to India from any part of the world. And Varanasi is like the top on the list. I went to Benares as a kid, and my memories are very much in the line of Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy. The Aparichitu, the second part of the trilogy. That's like the kid in that is what the kind of romantic idea I had about Benares. And then in 2010, I was working with a newspaper in Delhi, and I worked with a reporter called Samant Subramanian. We spent a lot of time in Benares understanding the issue of pollution, because tons of money has been spent on cleaning the river for a long time. And 1985, when they started the Ganga Action Plan and allocated a budget, and then nothing really panned out, what the plan was. So we spent time talking to various communities, like the Brahmins who are involved in the rituals, the domes, the Ganga Action Foundation, there's a Sankat Mochan Foundation which is involved in cleaning the river. They have this professor called Veerbhadra Mishra, who was a professor at BHU. So, and we spoke to the engineers who work at the sewage treatment plants. So there's different people involved in the whole process of cleaning, including the boat people. People who the Mallas are also a very important part in the story. But essentially the idea which was about romantic notions of Benares, which was also from a movie called Forest of Bliss by Robert Gardner. Again, a very, very important film to understand the context. So all that changed the moment I started thinking about the pollution aspect, because once you get over that visual aspect of Benares, the photographic, Raghubir Singh, who did a book on Benares, and there are lots of great books on Benares. But like once you go beyond that and see the other part of it, that it's a big disaster, which is it's been there for a long time, and then it's not been addressed formally. In photojournalism, you see news articles every now and then, photo stories on pollution of industrial effluents and all. But it's something which we've been almost we kind of do a thick skin to these things now. We don't it's like the wars. We don't pay attention to them anymore. What's happening in different parts right now. So one of the things was to approach documentary photography from a different angle, rather than just documenting what's in there. There's a very famous saying by photojournalist Robert Capa, who says, if your photographs are not good enough, then you're not close enough. That's something which, I really took it very seriously that. So, for me, it was about getting into the water and feeling the dirt into my own body itself. That was kind of a motivation to approach this work. And this process of making cyanotype prints was, just aligned with that idea of making the photographic print dirty. So I'm as if I'm actually polluting the print surface rather than just shooting a picture and making a digital print. I'm actually using the contaminants of the sites, the pollutants of the river on the print surface itself. And it was a very experimental approach. I was not sure it's going to work. It might have been a complete dud. It would have failed miserably, but it worked out, So that's a long way of coming to that.
What I admire in the work that both of you have done in this context is the granularity of it. In your case, this engagement with the communities of the river and the materiality of what this toxicity really is, not as an abstraction, but as sludge, as ash, as glue, as whatever it is that comes through the sewage pipe into the river. And Radhika, in your case, the way in which you've entered the lives of, with great respect and care, that you've entered the lives of these communities, which otherwise just tend to be like a census figure or something in a kind of ethnographic record. So I want to draw both of you out now on the forms of research. I can imagine it would have been a montage of interviews, survey, archival research. Could you just take us through that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I began in 2015, and during my visits to Jan Ghat, which is a dome basti, and to Manikarnika Ghat, Manikarnika Ghat is a place which, when you go there, anyone goes there, you'll have this very overwhelming sense or presence of men over there. And for me, and I was very young back at the time. For me, if you're someone with a notebook in one hand and a dictaphone in another, and a camera dangling from your neck, you're bound to, attract attention. So it took me a while to overcome or come to terms with that rather. And when I met the corpse burners, they were very guarded. They weren't very receptive. They weren't very forthcoming. For two reasons. One, that I was an outsider, quite visibly from a different caste and class, but also because I was a woman. And this is a very conservative, patriarchal community. So a woman approaching them is something which is completely unconventional and out of the ordinary. So that really helped me sort of take a step back and just observe the men. I would observe how they interact with each other, how they set up the pyres. I also got a chance to really observe Manikarnika Ghat as this place, this open-air cremation roundabout with thick layers of smoke and ash rising from the pyres and stinging your eyes, and you momentarily get visually impaired. There is so much smoke which is so vicious and dense that it settles deep in your lungs. And I'm sure Hari would have experienced that as well. And for someone like me who was completely uninitiated at that time, it was completely like a different experience. And this was something that the dome men experienced on a day-to-day basis. The heat from the pyre in the peak summer, ground radiating a lot of heat. So yes, so that really helped me it helped my ethnographic process. When the women in the community, it was easier to sit down and have conversations with them. Not very easy, but relatively easy. And because I feel like as a woman journalist, I could sit down with them in the privacy of their homes and have these long interviews and conversations, whereas I think if it was a male journalist, he would not be able to have those in-depth conversations with the women, because the husband would always accompany the woman. So initially our conversations were very to the point, very formal, and then over a period of time, because I kept returning to the basti, their guard began to pull down. And they started opening up. We had lengthier conversations, and it just, that's how I feel that I was able to reach a level with them where they felt comfortable, secure enough to trust me with sharing their lives.
Thank you, Radhika. Hari, you trained as an astrophysicist, and then, a series of detours, you found yourself in this cosmogram of a city, but dealing with realities of the kind Radhika's dwelt on. Could I ask you the same question about the forms of research that went into not only producing this particular body of work, but in approaching a formidable and even intimidating place and subject?
The foundation of this work was essentially done in 2010 when we did a series of articles for the newspaper. That's when I understood the complexity of the issue. It's not one, we can't blame the government or a particular agency. It's like everybody is involved in this. Like it's a loop. Everybody is responsible for this mess. So that's one thing which was very clear to me, that it has to be tackled from all kinds of angles. But one of the things which is absolutely like shocking and striking in Varanasi is the Manikarnika Ghat, like the place where you'll see dead bodies burning 24/7, and there's an estimate that about 300 bodies are burnt every day there. So for me, it was a point to start, because not only it was fascinating and scary, also very difficult to work with. Because the moment you are with the camera, they think you're a tourist and they want to either extract money from you and show some touristy shots and ask you to leave. So one of the things I learned as a photojournalist or a documentary photographer is not to take the camera and first make a connection with people. So I would hang out there and not take pictures, just be there. I'd spend days and nights just being there and, doing nothing really, observing. And then, somebody comes and speaks to you, and then somebody opens up, and then you get to, meet other people through that person, and that's how you build a kind of a rapport with the people there. That's how, I worked. And then once I start taking pictures, they absolutely relaxed with me around, and then they didn't really bother me after that, and they were actually very helpful, because when you're in the middle of that shooting, you're in the zone, you tend to forget that it's actually a burning ghat where there are a lot of burning embers all around. So there are times I stepped into the burning embers and literally got burned, and these guys helped me. So it was kind of like I had some affection built around that situation. So so most of these are all men, and I tried to speak to women in Harishchandra Ghat, and it was very difficult to enter that space. Again, it's that separation of male female is very strong there. So yeah, I spoke to them, but I never photographed them, because I thought it would be too shallow to get into that space and take pictures. It didn't make sense to me at that time. So but that was the part of Varanasi. And in Kanpur, I spoke to an NGO there, and they helped me to look at the places in Tanneries in Kanpur, because if you just go to Kanpur, you will not see this, the kind of contamination, pollution which is happening. Because in the city, it just looks like any other city which is tier 2 city in India. But once you get out of the city into the farms where the tanneries, effluents are treated, that's when the real mess begins to be very clear that it's a very, very toxic place. So most of the sewage treatment plants there, though they are commissioned, they don't work, inefficient, or the worst part is they have technology imported from other countries like Belgium and Germany, but the thing is they have power cuts for 18 hours. So it's like tokenism, token gestures of making all these sewage treatment plants but which don't have power to run. And beyond that, there's also issue of building dams. For example, in Uttarakhand, right from the Gangotri, when the river flows down, they built dams which impede the flow of the water. So during the rains, heavy rains, the sewage treatment plants cannot handle the volume of water which comes into them. During non-rainy seasons, the water level is so low that the toxic contamination increases dramatically, and which they cannot process. So it's either way they are in a bad shape. So these are the things which one realizes it's not just at the policy level or on paper things get Namami Ganga project, which started in 2015, they allocated 20,000 crores at that time, and it's on paper. A lot of work has been done, but just recent reports say that the water is still extremely polluted. Million times more fecal contamination matter is present than what is permitted. Though on paper it's sanitized. It looks clean and all, but it's but also the numbers which the UP Pollution Control Board has put out are highly disputable. They're also under question. What are the numbers which are given to the press? What is actual reality? So when you speak to different stakeholders, they have a very different interpretation of what's being done there.
As you were speaking, it occurred to me that everything that could go wrong seems to be going wrong at this point. We have a Forest Act which effectively allows us to, not us, but the regime, to denotify large tracts and to displace communities in the name of infrastructure. And infrastructure, again, is what is destroying the river systems of this country. And alongside is this unbelievable wish to polarize people and have them respond to one another only through the medium of antagonism rather than any form of solidarity. So I'm going to ask both of you how all of this got dramatized for you in terms of, you've talked about it a little earlier, Radhika, but the sheer awareness of being a Savarna person walking into this Dalit context, in your case, other complexities, you're a woman and so on. But could you talk a little bit about what that meant for you in terms of having to define or redefine or confront your own social and cultural location?
Sure. Just to answer your previous question about research, I forgot to mention that in terms of photography, these became forms of visual note-making in one sense. So when I was doing the interviews, I was also taking photographs, but I never published them. So, but that really helped me when I went back. I would be able to describe certain people or places through my narrative, so that people or the readers can get a sense of what the place is like that I was describing, what Manikarnika Ghat is like, the cremation ground right at the river bank of Ganga. Coming to your question of privilege, yes, certainly. These are conversations I've had too many times in my mind. When I began the project, I made, I was acutely aware of my privileged background. But therefore I was very careful of how I reported, how I wrote, and I also worked with a sensitivity editor on this book. And there are certain moments when my voice is in the book, but I always included it to ask pertinent questions or to drive the narrative forward. And I always made sure that my own voice never overshadowed the voices of the domes. Talking about privilege, I feel at the end of the day, Ranjit, I'm a journalist. That is my priority. I went to Jan Ghat and Manikarnika Ghat in the capacity of a reporter. I felt that conversations around the dome community, who perform this very crucial work in terms of performing the they do a crucial role in Hindu last rites. But at the same time, they are considered to be untouchables by a majority of dominant caste Hindus. So I wanted to see the hypocrisy that lay there. And I felt that other conversations, like I mentioned before, there weren't any other conversations about this community, about the women and the children and their own dreams and how they lived their day-to-day realities and lives. So I felt it was important for me to document their stories, to compile it and produce the work. Having said that, I know that no amount of research or storytelling or reporting is going to substitute the stories of or actually lived experiences of the domes. But I'm trying to have, I'm starting a conversation. I think that was my priority. And I feel that as a journalist, if you've spent enough time with the community, if you've got to know them on a personal level, if you are listening to whatever they say with intention, with love, with sensitivity, with attention, if you're asking the right questions based on rigorous reporting and research, and if you're writing with empathy, I think you're doing your job as a journalist. So that was where my intentions lay.
As a footnote to this, again, another of my previous lives as an editorial page writer for the Times of India, literally in the last century, we made a survey of the assistant editors, those of us who are technically among the senior crew. Overwhelmingly, most of us were Brahmins. There was one Ashraf Muslim, and there was one person who was part Parsi, part Dawoodi Bohra. Literally exactly these elite groups. So it's just a way of thinking through what is the lens that we apply, and as you've done clearly, how we need to be ever vigilant about how we frame the narratives and situations of others. So, I'm going to take this to you, Hari. You've literally dramatized the crisis between purity and pollution, which defines both the metaphysical and the physical aspects of Benares. But the same question for you: in what way did you feel that you were bearing witness out of a particular kind of caste identity? Was that something that came into play in a subtle way, in a more manifest way?
Yeah, talking to Dome community members, that's one thing which it becomes very significant, that everybody comes to them for one of the most important rituals, but at the same time they have nothing to do with them. Once the dead body is burned, that's the end of the story. So that takes away a lot of what I understand that as somebody from Bombay going there, I'm privileged to leave at any moment I want, but they have to be there. They are literally condemned to be in that situation. That's something which I'm very much aware of. So the least I can do is to be a little more humble, dealing with any of the community members, and leave my city or any ego out at the door, because their conditions are million times worse than I can never even conceive It's like being there is like it's a hellish atmosphere, and they live there. So I just had to do my work with a lot more empathy, and I realized that it's my responsibility to represent the work in the right way, and hopefully provoke a conversation around this community, and also on the larger issue of pollution. It's because it's in a way it's all linked to me it's all linked. The pollution, the way they're untouchables. Also for me, this project itself is about how pollutants enter our skin. Like skin is the barrier between our body and the outside world, as in the pollution. In a very interesting way, that's how the untouchability is, metaphorically speaking. It's about the skin. What is the first point of contact? Skin. So I don't know. Cyanotype again is one process which again that's contamination hitting the surface of a photograph and polluting it. And what does it mean? So these are the questions which were formal questions which I also had in my mind when I was thinking about this.
You talk about responsibility. It's already a question of the ethics of practice. This has come up in this conversation. So I'm going to come around now to ask both of you about the choice of form. I mean, you've alluded to this already, Radhika, but there's many ways in which one could have chosen to bear witness. What was it that, how did you decide on this? It's a non-fiction reportage format with the I voice from time to time. How did you come around to that particular form as against several other options that might have been available? So do you want to take us through that process?
Yes, we'll be here all day, I think. But I see, when you go to a journalism school, you're told that your own voice, the I, needs to be removed completely from the narrative. And so when I began working on this as a book, I followed the rules. I said, okay, I have these individuals, their stories in place. Let me just focus on that. But something just didn't fit, for me in terms of structure, and I felt that my own reporting experience, when I would go and meet the community members, how they reacted to me, how they responded, how they behaved with me, I felt that those experiences also needed to be documented in the book, so that people get an understanding of how caste still exists in our society even today. So for instance, when I went to Chand Ghat the first time, I met this elderly dome couple, and they just bowed in front of me. They put their palms together and they pulled their shoulders inwards, and they were looking down in front of me. And I'm someone who's young enough to be their granddaughter. And I was completely bewildered. And then I realized that caste is so ingrained, deeply ingrained in their psyche, that this is the way they felt was the appropriate way to respond or to greet me, someone who is quite visibly from a dominant caste. And this became even more relevant to me 2-3 months ago, where there was a newspaper report that came out where in Madhya Pradesh, an elderly Dalit man was tied up and assaulted and abused physically and verbally by 2 dominant caste men because he was walking past them and he did not fold his palms and greet them. So, these are the kind of moments which really make you realize how inhumane society is. And another, just to give you one more incident before I hand the mic over to Hari, is that when I was reporting, I brought the children from the Dome community to my guest house to share a meal, to watch a film. And the manager pulled me aside and he said, "Ma'am, in बच्चों को कौन से plate में हम उनको मतलब like what should we feed the children in? Like what plate should we serve the food to the children in?" And he didn't want to give the crockery. He didn't want to serve the food in the crockery, and he said that should I give it in patals, which is this leaf, dried leaf plates. And because the manager knew where the children had come from, he knew their neighborhood. So these were the experiences that I encountered, and I felt it was very important for me to bring that into the book, so that readers get a sense of, because there's so many conversations about caste doesn't exist anymore. It's so prevalent even today. So I think that's the reason why the I came in, and yes.
Hari, you also talked about this in the conversation thus far, but I'd ask you the same question about.
It just reminded me of one incident when I asked one of the dome to come and meet me at my guest house, and he just called me and said, "I will not enter your guest house." I said, "Why?" He said, "It's run by Brahmin, and I will not. They will." And he had like serious objection to that. I said, like, okay, I didn't realize it's such a strong barrier there. But as far as this work is concerned, formally speaking, I thought the blue color is something, for example, this looks like a Google map, which looking from the sky. So I thought that again connects to water somehow, and water is a very important component of this whole process of printing itself. And the fact that pollutants can be incorporated in the printing process was quite significant to the entire idea of conceiving this project. So yeah, that's my formal reason why I chose Cyanotypes, apart from the fact that I also wanted to somehow disrupt the usual way of photographing. We see the prints and in the newspapers and internet, and we feel like we know it. We've seen it all. We know it all. So I wanted to somehow make us relook at the same issue from a different angle. So that was one formal approach to this work.
Before I open this up to questions from all of you, one last question that I'm going to ask, which has to do with the way in which many of our practices today across disciplines tend to get structured in terms of the individual project, however long the temporality of that project might be. And then there are outcomes. It might be a book, it might be a set of essays or photographs. And both of you have talked of this in some way, but what then happens to the empathetic connection formed with the community or the predicament that you're looking at? And in the nature of the thing, as artists, as writers, we are going to move on to something else. But what's the afterlife of this particular engagement for both of you? Radhika, then I'm going to start with you, because to some extent you've been a voice to amplify these voices. What happens beyond your book?
You mean, am I still in touch with the members of the community, or?
Again, not to sort of nail you down to a manifesto of what you're doing next, but just your thoughts about how this engagement might continue for you.
On a personal level, with the members of the Dome community, I'm still in touch with them, and I'll continue that relationship. I don't think once you get to know them on a one-to-one level, and you know them for the last almost a decade, actually, strong bonds are built, and you can't just say, okay, bye. It's just, it doesn't work like that, at least for me. Yes, so Bhola, who's one of the protagonists in my book, he's approached me many a times for guidance, advice. He wants to, he is now educating 3 of his nieces. He's taken them to the city where he's moved to, and he's put them in school. So I regularly am in touch with them, give them advice wherever possible. I don't know if I've answered your question, but yes. Another book on Varanasi, at the moment, no, I don't think so. But let's see. Opportunities are always open.
No, this is what I was alluding to. Because the relationships that are formed, there's lots that might not go into the so-called outcome. But how do you take that forward? That is it. Thank you for your response. Harry, I'm going to ask you this thing. Also, by the way, a footnote, I should have said this much earlier. Thank you for reminding us of Mahantji, Veerbhadra Mishra of Sankat Mochan. We tend to forget in all of this the way in which a certain kind of politicized religiosity has overwhelmed this country. We forget that there are really courageous voices from within Hinduism who are not in consonance with what is going on. And I remember how Mahantji always stood for solidarity across community and religious lines, and that's a tradition associated with Sankat Mochan, and there are enough voices in Benares that speak for this other, more redemptive way of being together. But to come back to this question, the afterlife of this project.
So one of the fascinating things about Varanasi is the kind of anarchy, I think people are intrinsically anarchic there. One of the writers I met there in Varanasi is Kashinath Singh. He's one of the great Hindi novelists, and he wrote a fantastic book called Kashi Ka Assi, which is, he sat in a tea stall in Assi Ghat and heard the stories and compiled that book of conversations. And that's something which, there's a kind of free-spiritedness in people in Benares. Must, that word must is something which is very much applicable there. So even though there is this whole onslaught of Hindutva, I think there's still lots of dissenting voices in Varanasi. Even though from outside we see it as a religious city, I think there is a lot of plurality of thought within the city. And there are, I think, lots of people who do not align with the current vision of what it should be. Regarding the people there, one of the things which was, the most crucial thing for them in the Toon community was about livelihood. It was not enough for the subsistence, like the kind of money they were making. So most of them, the common question I had was, can I come to Bombay and do some job? So like, what job? So any job, like get me a job of a security guard. That's the level they were looking at. Everybody wanted to be a security guard in Bombay. So like, it's not well paying, and it's like it's a rough job. It's like, nothing can be more.
They just want to get out.
Yeah, exactly. So they just want to get out that way. Same thing in Kanpur, where I spoke to people working in the tanneries. They're all from nearby small villages, and Kanpur is like the first city they probably encountered. And what did they encounter? Just like a tannery with, very horrible working conditions with chemicals there. Again, the only thing they wanted to do is get out of that place, come to Bombay and become a security guard. It's like, okay, that's quite what an ambition. But yeah, I said, like, take my number. If you ever come to Bombay, if you need any help, let me know. So that was my conversation with them. But beyond that, this work itself, I had plans to go to other parts of along the Ganga stretch, because there are different kinds of issues of pollution in different places. Like Varanasi is mainly city sewage, which is the major component of pollution there. In Kanpur, it's the industrial pollution. In Bengal, for example, it's like the harbor and other kinds of pollution. Bihar has its own, and Uttarakhand has its other pollution. Then there is agricultural runoff, which are pesticide pollution. So there are various angles to look at into this whole business of pollution in Ganga. So yeah, I'm still open to thinking about these things and just considering that.
Thank you both.